Hare Krishna. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pravijagacharya Ashtottara Shri Shrimad Srila Abhay Charanavrin Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Nama Acharya Srila Thakur Haridas Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Rani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Hari Nama Sankirtana Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Samsthapak Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Go Premanande All glories to the Sammal devotees All glories to the Sammal devotees All glories to the Sammal devotees All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga Jai Srila Prabhupada Any way to turn this off?
Yeah.
Oh, you just use my computer.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
You want it?
Yeah, I'm good like this. Thanks. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishne Swadhamopagate Dharmajnanadivissaha Kalaunashtadrishamesha Puranarko Dhunoditaha. This is Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 2, Chapter 1, text number 11. Very famous verse. So, I think that it's so much here to discuss that maybe we can do the same verse tomorrow, because the normal format of my classes is to look at the verse and then see the commentaries on that verse, and then discuss Srila Prabhupada's purport in more depth. So we'll chant this verse together now. Please repeat. Etat nirvidyamananam ichhatam akuto bhayam yoginam nripa nirnitam harehe Namanukirtanam Etan nirvidyamananam Ichhatam akuto bhayam Yoginam nripanirnitam Harirnamanukirtanam. 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 Etat, it is, nirvidyamananam, of those who are completely free from all material desires. Ichhatam, of those who are desirous of all sorts of material enjoyment. Akutaha bhayam, free from all doubts and fear. Yoginam, of all who are self-satisfied. Nripa, O king. Nirnitam, decided truth. Harehe, of the Lord. Sri Krishna. Nama, holy name. Anu, after someone, or always. Kirtanam, chanting. Translation: O king, the constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from all material desires, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and those who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. Kindly repeat. O king, constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from all material desires, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and also those who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. There's a long purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, savior of the modern world. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. In the previous verse, the great necessity for attaining attachment to Mukunda has been accredited. Anybody remember the previous verse? Text 10.
That very Srimad Bhagavatam I shall recite before you, because you are the most sincere devotee of Lord Krishna. One who gives full attention and respect to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam achieves unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord, the giver of salvation.
Yes. And particularly the words are used. Yasya shraddhadatam ashu syan mukunde matihi sati. One's mind will be chaste at the lotus feet of Mukunda by hearing this Srimad Bhagavatam. That's the gist of it. So, this is what Prabhupada reminds us of that first thing. There are different types of persons who desire to attain success in different varieties of pursuits. Generally, the persons are materialists who desire to enjoy the fullest extent of material gratification. That's usually the biggest number as well. Next to them are the transcendentalists who have attained perfect knowledge about the nature of material enjoyment and are thus aloof from such an illusory way of life. More or less, they are satisfied in themselves by self-realization. Above them are the devotees of the Lord, who neither aspire to enjoy the material world nor desire to get out of it. They are after the satisfaction of the Lord, Sri Krishna. In other words, the devotees of the Lord do not want anything on their personal account. If the Lord desires, the devotees can accept all sorts of material facilities. And if the Lord does not desire this, the devotees can leave aside all sorts of facilities, even up to the limit of salvation. Nor are they self-satisfied because they want the satisfaction of the Lord only. In this verse, Sri Shukadev Goswami recommends the transcendental chanting of the holy name of the Lord. By offenseless chanting and hearing of the holy name of the Lord, one becomes acquainted with the transcendental form of the Lord, and then the attributes of the Lord, and then with the transcendental nature of his pastimes, etc. Here it is mentioned that one should constantly chant the holy name of the Lord after hearing it from authorities. This means that hearing from the authorities is the first essential. Hearing of the holy name gradually promotes one to the stage of hearing about his form, about his attributes, his pastimes, and so on. And thus the necessity of the chanting of his glories develops successively. This process is recommended not only for the successful execution of devotional service, but also even for those who are materially attached. According to Sri Shukdev Goswami, this way of attaining success is an established fact, concluded not only by him, but also by all other previous acharyas. Therefore, there's no need of any further evidence. The process is recommended not only for the progressive students in different departments of ideological success, but also for those who are already successful in their achievement as fruitive workers, as philosophers, or as devotees of the Lord. Srila Jiva Goswami instructs that the chanting of the holy name should be loudly done, and it should be performed offenselessly as well, as recommended in the Padma Purana. One can deliver himself from the effects of all sins by surrendering himself unto the Lord. One can deliver himself from all offenses at the feet of the Lord by taking shelter of his holy name. But one cannot protect himself if one commits an offense at the feet of the holy name of the Lord. Such offenses are mentioned in the Padma Purana as being 10 in number. The first offense is to vilify the great devotees who have preached about the glories of the Lord. The second offense is to see the holy names of the Lord in terms of worldly distinction. The Lord is the proprietor of all the universes, and therefore he may be known in different places by different names. But that does not in any way qualify the fullness of the Lord. Any nomenclature which is meant for the Supreme Lord is as holy as the others, because they are all meant for the Lord. Such holy names are as powerful as the Lord, and there is no bar for anyone in any part of the creation to chant and glorify the Lord by the particular name of the Lord as it is locally understood. They are all auspicious, the names that is, and one should not distinguish such names of the Lord as material commodities. The third offense is to neglect the orders of the authorized acharyas, or spiritual masters. The fourth offense is to vilify scriptures or Vedic knowledge. The fifth offense is to define the holy name of the Lord in terms of one's mundane calculation. The holy name of the Lord is identical with the Lord himself, and one should understand the holy name of the Lord to be non-different from him. The sixth offense is to interpret the holy name. The Lord is not imaginary, nor is his holy name. There are persons with a poor fund of knowledge who think the Lord to be an imagination of the worshipper, and therefore think his holy name to be imaginary. Who is that? Anybody know? Yes, the Mayavadis. They say, well, the ultimate thing is Brahman, and this Krishna, he's just a stepping stone to get there. That's offensive. So, okay. Such a chanter of the holy name cannot achieve the desired success in the matter of chanting the holy name. The seventh offense is to commit sins intentionally on the strength of the holy name. In the scriptures it is said that one can be liberated from the effects of all sinful actions simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord. One who takes advantage of this transcendental method and continues to commit sins on the expectation of neutralizing the effects of sins by chanting the holy name of the Lord is the greatest offender at the feet of the holy name. Such an offender cannot purify himself by any recommended method of purification. In other words, one may be a sinful man before chanting the holy name of the Lord, but after taking shelter in the holy name of the Lord and becoming immune, one should strictly restrain oneself from committing sinful acts with the hope that his method of chanting the holy name will give him protection. The eighth offense is to consider the holy name of the Lord and his chanting method to be equal to some material auspicious activity. There are various kinds of good works for material benefits, but the holy name and his chanting are not mere auspicious holy services. Undoubtedly, the holy name is holy service, but he should never be utilized for such purposes. Since the holy name and the Lord are of one and the same identity, one should not try to bring the holy name into the service of mankind. The idea is that the Supreme Lord is the supreme enjoyer. He is no one's servant or order supplier. Since the holy name of the Lord is identical with the Lord, one should not try to utilize the holy name for one's personal service. The ninth offense is to instruct those who are not interested in chanting the holy name of the Lord about the transcendental nature of the holy name. If such instruction is imparted to an unwilling audience, the act is considered to be an offense at the feet of the holy name. The 10th offense is to become uninterested in the holy name of the Lord, even after hearing of the transcendental nature of the holy name. The effect of chanting the holy name of the Lord is perceived by the chanter as liberation from the conception of false egoism. False egoism is exhibited by thinking oneself to be the enjoyer of the world and thinking everything in the world to be meant for the enjoyment of oneself only. The whole materialistic world is moving under such false egoism of I and mine. But the factual effect of the chanting of the holy name is to become freed from such misconceptions. Om Jnana Timanantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utapadakamadam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Madgavira Bigopala Swikuryat Kripaya Yadi Tadaiva Sampayaha Pitva Hrishye Yustat Priyajanaha. In his commentary on this verse, Sridhar Swami keeps it really simple. You may have noticed already that we're addressing three kinds of persons. Prabhupada said in the beginning of his purport, there are various people in this world, all different kinds. It takes all kinds, as we say. And they all want different things. And all these different kinds of persons and their aspirations can be grouped into three. There is karma, there's jnana, and there's yoga. Did we hear about this yesterday? Yes, we did. Etavan Sankhya Yoga Bhyam Swakarma Parinishthaya. That covers them all right there. And for all of them, it is said that the ultimate goal is to remember God at the time of death. And now we're getting specifically how the acharyas recommend doing this, and that is chanting the holy name. Actually, you will see that the first verse of the Bhagavatam, in some sense, this can be considered the first verse of the Bhagavatam, because the essential teaching of the Bhagavatam begins here. Other things are more or less preliminary. And the final verse of Bhagavatam is also dealing with the chanting of the holy name. So it's really all about chanting. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And Sridhar Swami says, this process of chanting Hare Krishna, it's meant for both those who are just entering the threshold of spirituality for the first time and disoriented from material experience and unsure about what the goal is, and they can chant, no problem. Things become very clear very quickly, just as the sun dissipates clouds when it rises. When it's dark and when there's clouds everywhere, you can't see much. That's what we're all like in this world. But once we chant the holy name, what is that verse? Krishna Shuryasham, Mai hoy andhakar, Jaha Krishna taha mayar nahi adhikar. Krishna is like the sun, Maya is like the darkness. Wherever the sun rises, there cannot be any darkness. Holy name is like this. So, those who are just aspiring for spiritual life, they can chant, and those who are adept, masters, siddhas, sadhakanam siddhanam chanataha param anyat shreyostit yaha etariti. In this verse he says, this is what's being stated, both aspirants and masters. For either one, there's no greater welfare, ultimate welfare, shreya, than this chanting. So what is the ichatam we heard? Ichatam akutobhayam. What does it mean? He says it means kaminam, those who want things. Raise your hand if you want things. Yes, we're all familiar with this. We're all intimate with this, we can say. We want things. We have kama. So, for us, it's perfect process. And tat phala sadhanam etareva. This is the means by which they will gain their aspirations. Tat phala. Whatever it is, they want this or they want that. This will give it to them. Nirvidyamananam mumukshunam. Nirvidyamananam, that's the tongue twister. It means those who are desiring mukti, mumukshus. Moksha sadhana metareva. This is the sadhana that will give you liberation, if that's what you want. And yoginam jnaninam phalam chaitareva nirnitam. It's described also that this is the fruit of the jnanis or the yogis, either one. Natra pramanam vaktavyam ityarthaha. This means that in this respect, there's no need of mentioning any other evidence. Why? Nirnitam. It's already been concluded before us. There are many things like this. That's why it's very helpful to respect long-standing traditions. This is called sadachara, or it's also called sometimes shishtachara, or sometimes it's called aitiham, something for which you may not understand, but it's long established practice. It's a good idea to respect that and embrace that, accommodate it practically. So this is what's indicated when Srila Prabhupada translates Hare Nama Anukirtanam. Anukirtanam means following the ways that have been recommended by our predecessors. That's very important. But it has a double meaning. Anukirtanam can mean, let's see who says this. But this is all that Sridhar Swami says about it, so let's go on to see what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says. He says, among the angas of bhakti, hearing, chanting, and remembering are the chief ones. This was stated back in text 5. Anybody remember that? I'll just quickly. O descendant of King Bharata, one who desires to be free from all miseries must hear about, glorify, and also remember the personality of Godhead, who is the Supersoul, the controller and the savior from all miseries. So, these are the three chief things, but among those three, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur tells us here, chanting is the chief. Chanting is the mukhya thing, the main thing. In chanting, however, there is chanting of the Lord's name, His qualities, and His pastimes. Just like in Bengali Vaishnava tradition, we have three kinds of kirtan. There's Nama Kirtan, there's Leela Kirtan, and there's Rasa Kirtan, or Gunagan, we can say. So, among those, this chanting of the holy name of the Lord is the best, Nama Kirtan. And among those who are chanting Nama Kirtan, this Anukirtan is the best. Now he's explaining. Anukirtan means, according to one's bhakti that we have received from our spiritual master, evam parampara praptam, or it means continuous chanting, because this is also the meaning of the prefix anu, continually chanting. Either way, this is how it's understood. So it's defined nirnitam by the previous acharyas, not just by me. This is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur speaking in the first person. This is not coming from me, not my opinion. This is our acharya sammata. It's described in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's agreed by all the acharyas. Therefore, there is no need of inquiry for any further proof. Actually, this is the fact with many things that we have received from our Guru Parampara and from our spiritual master through the Guru Parampara. There's no need of inquiry about the proof. Once we have accepted his authority, there's no further need of question. Whatever he says, we accept. This is the system. Once we have accepted him, before we have accepted him, there's every need of inquiry and doubt and critical thinking. That's very, very important. Don't just blindly, fools rush in, it's stated. So we don't just blindly want to follow anything. We have to do so very soberly. And in the beginning, once we have to make full inquiry until we're fully satisfied. Then once that is effected, and we accept the spiritual master as perfect authority, then there's no more questions. That's very important, because you cannot make advancement as long as you're second-guessing everything that you hear. All right, so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur continues. He says, in chanting, there's no fear of purity or impurity concerning time, place, person, or utensils. What is that? Desha, Kala, Patra, and Dravya. This means that even outcasts who cannot tolerate serving the Lord do not hesitate to chant. Even impure persons are allowed to chant. All of us are impure, practically speaking, in the Kali Yuga. Moreover, there's no good, better, and best for the sadhakas and the siddhas. Chanting is for those who are indifferent to all desires, including the desire for liberation. It is for those who desire material things, and such persons can chant just as they make offerings for certain goals. Sometimes people worship Krishna. If you go to a place like Guruvayur in South India, everyone is very enthusiastically worshiping Krishna, but they're worshiping Krishna in order to fulfill their material desires, and the Lord fulfills them. But we're being cheated in this way, because there's so much more that you can get from Bhagavan. If you settle for a new car or for passing an examination, this is only a very temporal thing. All right, so thus the meaning is as follows. It's recommended for the unalloyed devotees, for those who desire svarga, and for those who desire liberation, as well as those who are self-satisfied already. This we've heard already. So this means that according to these different methods, one will get their corresponding results. They don't get the same result. Yesterday we heard that the actual result of any of these processes is that we should actually remember God. And remembering God is not possible unless we're serving God. That Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita many times. For example, Bhaktya tvananyaya shakya aham evam vidhorjna gyatam drashtam shatatvena praveshtam cha parantapa. You can understand me as I am, Arjun, by bhakti. So, bhakti may take the form as karma, or it may take the form of gyan, or it may take the form of yoga, but it's always bhakti, and it's essential to remember that. Otherwise, we just become mere karmis and gyanis and yogis. We have to always remember that no matter what we're doing or thinking, we're doing bhakti. This is the point. And the chanting of the holy name is what awakens that consciousness. So this is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's conclusion. Now, in Krama Sandarbha, which functions as Jiva Goswami's commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, we have massive amount of data given by Jiva Goswami. Long commentary. Very long. So I'm just going to try to summarize and, because Srila Prabhupada also makes his own wonderful contributions, and, he expresses the synthesis of all the statements of these acharyas in his own purport, which desires its own covering maybe tomorrow. But anyway, Jiva Goswami begins by saying that having stated the greatness of the Srimad Bhagavatam already in texts 9 and 10, now in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, this Nama Kirtan is taught as the chief among all the various limbs of bhakti. Do you remember text 9 and 10? I'll read it quickly. O saintly king, I was certainly situated perfectly in transcendence, yet I was still attracted by the delineation of the pastimes of the Lord, who is described by enlightened verses. Those enlightened verses, for your information, would be the verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then he continues in text 10, that very Srimad Bhagavatam I shall recite before you, because you are the most sincere devotee of the Lord Krishna. One who gives full attention and respect to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam achieves unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord, the giver of salvation. Sometimes we don't have faith. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Sometimes the spiritual master gives an instruction that we just don't have faith in. But here Shukdev Goswami is saying, if you just submissively hear Srimad Bhagavatam, you will gain faith. So we have to be a little patient. So, he says, this Namakirtan is taught as the highest sadhana for all people, including even those who are liberated already. It's not like we chant to get something other goal. We're chanting to deepen our appreciation of the chanting process and to get what that chanting really confers upon us, which is pure love. There's no love in this world, practically. We've all experienced so-called love. It's full of holes, always. So we suffer as a result. But spiritual love is perfect because it cannot be taken away. And it is never having any agenda or imperfection. Now, this is Jiva Goswami he's summarizing Sridhar Swami's commentary, but since we've already read that, I'm just going to skip over that part. So, but he also concludes that since this is prescribed or nirnitam for all people, therefore there's no necessary to give any further proof. Now, he states two things which Srila Prabhupada also mentioned in his purport. This chanting, number one, should be loud. Sometimes we're chanting japa by ourselves. With the beads, it's a little soft. And Sankirtan, we're performing with musical instruments, dancing, either in the temple or outside. That is considered to be superior because it's loud. Chanting should be loud. It's better. So he quotes as evidence of this Srimad Bhagavatam verse, Narad Muni speaking in chapter 6, text 26 of the first canto. Narad Muni is saying, I gave up my shyness and was just chanting without any inhibition, and began to remember the most excellent hidden pastimes of the Lord, and I wandered the earth with satisfied mind, without material desires, without pride and selfishness, and waiting for the time in which the Lord would appear to me. Then Jiva Goswami begins what is the real thrust of his purport, and what is the main point in Srila Prabhupada's purport also. What is it? Anybody's listening carefully, you already have some clue. The 10 offenses against the holy name. This is very important. Huh? All of them. All of them. Yeah. Yeah, we'll discuss these. One should avoid the 10 offenses as stated in Padma Purana. Sanat Kumar says, I think he was speaking to Lord Brahma, Sarvaparadha kridapi muchyante hari sangshrayat harerapya bhadathan yaha kuryad vipada pangsanaha namashraya kadachit syat taratyeva sanamataha namnopi sarva srado hyaparadhat patatyatha. A person who commits all offenses is freed from those offenses by taking shelter of the Lord. But if a person who is personified evil commits offenses to the Lord, by taking shelter of the name, he's also delivered by that holy name. Yet, by offending the holy name, even a person who has become friendly to all living beings will actually go to hell. He says this. How do you become friendly to all living beings? Okay, tolerance. Tolerance is a symptom. Well, what is the substrate of that friendliness to? Yeah, that's pretty good. That's what the Ishopanishad says. I was thinking of Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, Brahmabhuta prasannatmana shochatina kangshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu. When you are Brahman realized, that is to say, when you realize that you are not this material body, then and then only can you actually be friendly to all other living beings, because until that point, as long as you have any bodily concept of life, in other words, false ego, which Prabhupada mentions in his purport, as long as you're hanging on to that, then you're going to be envious to some degree of other living entities. And you're going to calculate as soon as you enter a space that, yeah, okay, what's in it for me? Who's here? Who do I have to contend with? Is it not? Yes. This is our mentality. It's actually an animal mentality. This is what animals do. Human beings are not supposed to be this way. Human beings have the facility for a higher consciousness, and chanting is to raise our consciousness in this way. But even such a person who is liberated already, raise your hand if you're liberated. Everybody's already admitted we're full of desire, we're not liberated. But even if you are liberated, he says, Sanat Kumar, great authority, you can go to hell if you offend the holy name. It's really quite clear. Hyaparadhat patatyatha. Or at least you can fall down. He doesn't actually mention hell, but you fall down. Even from that liberation. So it's serious business. So let's talk about the 10 offenses. This is Sanat Kumar again, continuing. First offense. Satam nindanam naha paramama paradham vitanute yatakyatim yatam kathamu sahate tadvigaraham. That means when one criticizes devotees, he commits the greatest offense. How can the holy name tolerate when his devotee is being criticized? Somebody who has tried to encourage this chanting all over the world, and then you criticize that person, how can the holy name be, he cannot tolerate it. It's actually stated here, katam usahate. How can he tolerate this abuse? So that's the first offense. The holy name becomes very incensed, we can say, when we are criticizing sadhus. Then, Shivasya Shri Vishnorya Ihugunanamadi Sakalam Dhyabhinam Pashyet Sakhalu Harinama Hitakaraha. This is the second part of the same verse. He who sees the qualities and the names of Shiva and Vishnu to be the same hurts the Lord's holy name. Ahitakara. The Lord's feelings are injured when we think that, he's the same as all the demigods are all the same. This is an Indian disease, actually. But here we're hearing from Padma Purana. We're hearing from Sanat Kumar, great authority. He's saying, well, actually, there's two ways to interpret it. I'll be liberal here. Dhiya bhinnam pashyet sukhalu harinama hitakaraha. Dhiya bhinnam. Dhiya bhinnam, if you see some distinction between the two, that's an offense. And if you dhiya abhinnam, if you see there's no distinction, that's also an offense. So what are we supposed to do? It's confusing. Srila Prabhupada's translation very nicely reconciles this apparent contradiction. He says, you should not see the Devatas and Vishnu as being separate in the sense that they all represent the same authority of the Supreme Lord. They're all working on the same side, so to speak. They're all doing the same business of trying to reclaim fallen souls. They're one. They're all bona fide, we can say like that. I had this experience because I go to South India a lot, Tiruchendur to be exact. This is the second biggest temple of Skanda in India. And, I was sitting in the Agraharam of that temple. That's where all the Brahmanas live, priests, all priestly families. So we were having a program there. So one little girl was innocent enough to raise her hand, and she said, well, then tell me clearly, is Krishna supreme or is Skanda supreme? Talk about the hot seat. So I told her, you go into the temple of Skanda and you pray like anything to Skanda to reveal to you what is the true thing. And he'll do so. You know how I know this? Because my host there was formerly a priest in that temple. And he came to Microsoft Corporation back in the heyday of Reading, Redmond, Washington. Yeah, Bill Gates. And he was working in Microsoft. So many IT engineers, I was preaching to them. IT ka matlab hai kya? It means international Telugus, international Tamil. Take your pick. So all IR smartas, they were there and working for Microsoft, but we preached to him and he became a devotee. And he came back to his native place, and now he's preaching in all dozen villages all around that district and making so many people devotees. He got fired up by Krishna consciousness. But anyway, the point that we're making here is that you cannot see the Devatas as being independent of the Supreme Lord. They're all working together. But you should not see that they're absolutely non-different, because they aren't. They're Ekala Ishwara Krishna Arashab Pritya, one Bengali poet said. That there is one Supreme Lord and all the others are servants. And the Devatas are also saying this. Shiva himself says this, since the name Shiva is mentioned here. What does he say? Anybody know the verse I'm thinking of? Aradhananam sarvesham Vishnur aradhanam param. Shiva himself spoke this verse. So, one should neither see the Devatas and Vishnu to be absolutely non-different, because there are distinctions. But one should also see that they're one in the sense that they're serving the same purpose. This is what it means. So if we have some other conception, then it puts an obstacle in the way of actually proper chanting of the holy name. Now, Guroravagnya Shruti Shastra Nindanam Tatharthavado Harinamnya Kalpanam Namno Baladyasya hi Papa Buddhir Na Vidyate Tasya Yamair Hishutti. That means, if you ignore what your spiritual master tells you to do, Guroravagnya, or if you think less of your spiritual master, you think, well, he's a New York Jew after all. Or, he's just a Bengali, so why should I listen to him? This is nonsense. This is not the right attitude. And certainly whatever the spiritual master, if he's bona fide spiritual master, and that we've already discussed, you should conclude that very definitely before you accept him as such. But once you have accepted him, then Guroravagnya becomes an obstacle in the path of chanting this holy name. So that's one thing. And Shruti Shastranandanam, to blaspheme the Vedic literatures, Any Vedic literatures, Shruti or Smriti. Shastra means Smriti, it's a synonym. So, Shruti Shastra Nindanam is not allowed. I mentioned already criticizing the Indian disease, which is we think all the devatas are all the same. Now I'm going to poke at the Westerners. They have this tendency to blaspheme Vedic literature. It's a fact. No, we don't follow Manusmriti. It's not, we're Vaishnavas, we're above all this, even though Prabhupada is endorsing it on every 10th page of his books. So this is something we have to carefully avoid in order to chant properly. Tathartha vado harinamne kalpanam. The fifth offense is to consider that all this glorification of the holy name is just arthavada. Arthavada means exaggeration or, just trying to get you to chant somehow. What is the word for this? Persuasion, persuasive words. And harinamni kalpanam, if you say something that, actually one author did say this, I won't name any names, but this is a previous generation, he said, Krishna means dark, black, right? That's another meaning of the word Krishna. And black means unknown, so the name Krishna actually refers to this great unknown thing, which is the absolute truth, as if that wasn't Krishna. So this is a concoction. Kalpana means to concoct some understanding of what this Harinam is all about. That will not help us to realize the transcendental nature of the name. And the worst offense, Srila Prabhupada said on at least one occasion, notwithstanding what we've already heard from Sanat Kumar, Namno balad yasya hi papa buddhir, we've discussed. He actually discussed this at length in his purport. To commit sins on the strength of chanting the holy name, because the holy name will eradicate more sins than you can commit, it's a fact. But that holy name will not tolerate if you deliberately try to commit sins and then wipe your feet on him. That doesn't work. It's an offensive mentality. And so much so that he says, Na vidyate tasya yanairhi shuddhihi. Even Yamaraj cannot figure out a reformatory means sufficient to purify such a person. There can be no purification for such person, either through Yamaraj's punishment or through Yama in the sense of personal restraints of other sorts. That you can take Yama in both ways. So,
Prabhu?
Yeah, we can have questions at the end.
It's actually not a question. We usually end at 8:30. Is it possible that maybe in at 8:40 that we could wrap up?
We'll try.
Thank
So,
you.
next verse. Dharma vrata tyaga hutadi sarva shubha kriya samyam epi pramadaha ashraddadhane vimukhe prashvanvati yashchopadesha shivanama parathaha. Thinking that the chanting of the holy name is no greater than following dharma, vrata, tyaga, huta, adi. Those who are Indian, they understand what this means. We do sacrifices, we do vows, we renounce things, we do follow our duties very conscientiously. This is the glory of Indian civilization. They have some conception that this is elevating one. In Western societies, they used to have this as well, but it's been lost long ago, thanks in large part to the scientific revolution, the so-called Renaissance as well. But to think that these things, although they're auspicious and they are extremely helpful actually, to think that they are equal to the holy name, that's very, very wrong. And this is a problem because, say, for example, temple of, Skanda, as we mentioned earlier, looks just like a temple of Vishnu. Puja's going on just like the tendency is there to equate them, but they're not the same because the devatas are working within the limitation of the three modes of material nature, whereas Lord Vishnu is completely beyond this, transcendental. So this is comparable to the second offense, in which we think that Vishnu and the demigods are equal. So similarly, to think that preliminary processes or sub-religious principles are equal to devotional service, it will obstruct our chanting. Now, another way to see this is the word pramada is used, pramada. means madness. Bhanu Swami takes it that if you think that these things are all one and the same, then you're mad. You can take it that way, but another way to take it is pramada itself is another offense. And what does that pramada mean in that case? Pramada means distraction, to chant without attention, inattentive chanting. Raise your hand if you've ever chanted Hare Krishna without very much attention. You don't have to raise your hand. We all know very well it's not so easy to tame the mind. This Lakshmi Tantra says that when you sit down to chant your Hare Krishna mantra, this mind is like a wild bear, and you've got to wrestle that bear and tame that bear. So, yeah, it's difficult. Pramada is one of the big problems. Ashradhathane vimukhepya shrindvati. And trying to instruct somebody who doesn't have faith in what you're saying or doesn't want to hear what you're saying, we've all had this experience. I won't specify, but it's a common characteristic among Abrahamic faiths. Certain sects within those Abrahamic faiths, they just like to shove their thing down your throat. Aggressively, forcefully, very imposingly, and that's offensive. So we have to be careful to avoid this. Sometimes they even kill you if you don't surrender to what they're saying, but we're kind of spared of that. Anyway, so this is also a namaparatha. To try to force something on an unwilling audience is not good. It serves no purpose, actually, except that it destroys your own chanting. Now, Shrutvapi nama mahatmya priti rahato naraha aham mamadi paramo namni syopya paradha krita. We'll stop here, but this is, in some sense, this is actually the main point here. What does it mean? That person who, even after hearing the glories of the holy name, still remains devoid of love. We're talking about divine love here. And for him, the aham mama, I and mine mentality is parama, paramount in his mind. That person is definitely an offender. Namni sopya paradha krita. So this is kind of sobering thought, because we're all quite familiar with this mentality, I think, and we have to work on that. So I have to stop now, and maybe we can resume this tomorrow and finish up the commentaries. I had hoped that we would finish them today, but the time is very less. So does anybody have any questions or any comments on any of this? There's a lot to question here. Yes, Kunti.
Well, just to keep it concise, us old fogies, I guess that's what you may want to call it, the people who've been around for decades or whatever. Lately, there's just such a breach of etiquette that I've experienced personally. And I just don't know if it's me, if I'm a magnet for that, because maybe I've done that in the past, and now I'm getting a dose of my own medicine. But do you have any advice? Thank you.
Well, I can't really comment on such a general thing because, maybe if you give an example, but yeah, we have to follow Vaishnava etiquette. We have to, that's another word for sadachar, shishtachara, dharma, as I said, sadhana dharma, or even other kinds of dharma. But yeah, we have to follow these things because they're very helpful in producing the right consciousness with which we can work on anartha-nivritti. If we don't have put it this way, we know from Hitopadesh, ahara nidra bhayamaithunam cha ityadi, that human beings only can take advantage of Krishna consciousness. This is a very, central idea throughout Srila Prabhupada's books. But what we don't hear is that to qualify as a bona fide human being, you have to observe dharma. Otherwise, you're not a human being, technically speaking. And so it's very, very useful for us. Look at it this way. Hridayananda Maharaj gave a nice analogy about this many years ago. He said, if you want to go to Houston, let's say if you want to go even to Plano, or where was it, Allen, to attend the Sadhu Sangha retreat, you have to take 75 north, right? Everybody agree? 75 north. But you can't get on 75 north, right? Directly from your home. You have to get on the feeder road, you have to take these things are preliminary, but they're absolutely essential in the sense that you can't have the 75 expressway without taking these side streets. So in a similar way, these sub-religious principles and sadachara and dharma and all the things that we're warned not to equate with the holy name, they're nonetheless very important because they really, really facilitate our chanting. And we see persons who dismiss those things, either out of ignorance or foolishness or deliberate neglect, they don't become really Krishna conscious. We can see it very clearly. They get a little funny. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur has explained this very nicely in his Harinama Chintamani, I think. Maybe it's in one of his other books instead, but he mentions two kinds of offensive chanters or clearing chanters. That one is a person who is, out of immaturity, he's committing offenses to the holy name. Out of immaturity. He will be quickly purified if he's sincere, and his chanting will become pure. But a person who is mature, a person who knows better, and is still maintaining material attachments, this was the final verse of the 10 offenses that we just read, then that person is in a different category altogether. And that person doesn't really have a very bright future. Because he's, in effect, he's deliberately neglecting the orders of the spiritual master, for example. Let's say Srila Prabhupada tells us, the remaining 50% of his mission, ISKCON, is, to implement Varnashram Dharma. And we decide to either concoct something else that we call Varnashram Dharma, or we just decide to replace it altogether, reject it. Either way, it's Gurura Vajna. And similarly, we already mentioned, if you want to blaspheme the Shastras by which you would do that, then that's also another offense. You see? And people who are deliberately doing this with a specific socio-political agenda, in most cases that's what it is, then they fall down. They're already fallen, but they will not have a bright future. So, yeah, we'll say more about this tomorrow because Jiva Goswami himself, and we're about halfway through his commentary, and he's quoting quite a bit of evidence from Shastras that really elaborate on these ideas. So we'll see what he has to say. Any other questions? Any doubts? Yes.
So you mentioned the chanting should be done loudly.
Yes.
And now when it comes to japa, there are also variations on the
Yeah, no, don't chant your rounds like this. And then nobody else can chant their rounds. Srila Prabhupada regularly stopped this. You ask Shrutakirti about this, he'll tell you. Shruti in Los Angeles, he was in was sitting in his garden, and there was a brahmachari, somewhere outside chanting really loudly. And Prabhupada asked him, go tell him to be a little quiet. And, naturally the devotee, because, he had the Kali Yuga mentality, when Shrutakirti advised him that, if you can be a little quiet, Prabhupada is trying to concentrate. The devotee said, no, this is chanting the holy name. It's all auspicious. It should be chanted loudly. He didn't listen. So, Shrutakirti went back there. And again, Prabhupada told him, you please, tell him to be quiet. And he went back and said, Prabhupada is telling you to be quiet. Then it got in. So sometimes, this is why we have to hear again and again and again. There are people who can hear for 30 or 40 years and still not get it. We see them. So, we have to be patient, we have to be determined, we have to follow the principles very strictly, and we have to do so according sato vrittehe, means according to the example set by our predecessors. All these 6 things that Rupa Goswami mentions in his Upadeshamritam. Is that answering your question? But the definition of kirtan is that it's loud. And it's with many people also. Community singing, samaj gayan, they call it in Vrindavan. So, and the definition of japa is that it's quiet and personal. Both of them are chanting. But of the two, actually, the maximum benefit, because it benefits many others, is this Sankirtan. You had a question? You're raising your hand? Huh.
So when you were talking about seeing Shiva and Vishnu and their qualities being the same as Krishna, and then vice versa, not seeing them to be the same, and what are we to do? And you had said that Prabhupada says to not see them to be separate, as they're all doing the same thing. So what is your take on people who worship other deities? Are they, who do worship Shiva and Vishnu and see them as their highest, are they considered offenders of Krishna?
No, not necessarily. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It depends. I don't know, should I repeat your question? Because you didn't use a microphone. There are many people out there, right?
You can, if you'd like.
People are listening in the ether. I think your question is that what is the status of persons who are worshipping Vishnu and demigods and considering them all to be all the same? Is that fair? I mean,
Not to be considering them all the same, it's just that, it says who sees Shiva and Vishnu qualities to be the same as Krishna, although they're not, because Krishna is the ultimate highest. But, so are they still seen in Krishna's eyes as devotees, since they are demigods who...
demigod worshippers. Yeah, okay, that's a good question. What is the situation of people who worship Krishna, but they also worship demigods, right? And, they're not really able to make the distinction so clearly, maybe. So yeah, they can be devotees if they understand that their goal is to worship Krishna and that the demigods are representatives of Krishna even. We find in the fourth canto, Prachina Barhi was very much absorbed in fruitive rituals. But Prabhupada comments in his purports there that he was performing those fruitive rituals with the attitude of devotional service. That's completely pure. But and he was no doubt working under the instructions of his spiritual master, which is essential. But a person who is worshipping all the deities, going to every temple and not really distinguishing so carefully, that is the person that is being mentioned in the Padma Purana as, not having the right understanding of, it's called Sambandha Gyan, of the distinction between the two, because there are ontological distinctions between the Devatas and the Supreme Lord, that should be maintained. But they should all be respected. Bhaktivinoda Thakur puts it very nicely when he says, Shakale Shaman, Korite Shakti Dehonata Jathajata. Means, give me the ability to properly respect everyone according to his own position. Everyone should be respected, but not everybody should be respected equally, because there are higher and lower positions that should be recognized. So the Devatas are working on behalf of the Supreme Lord. They are not absolutely one with the Supreme Lord. And they're not capable of replacing the Supreme Lord also. They're not interchangeable, in other words. This mentality is an offense. But the understanding that the Devatas are representatives of Krishna, and to offer respect to them, and even to pray to them, that help me with my bhakti, that is completely acceptable. We find that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he went to the same temple that I was talking about earlier, he's also worshipping, he's also bowing down to Skanda to offer respects only. So everyone should be respected, but that doesn't mean that everyone is God. Even if any position of authority is representative of God, but still, they're not in all respects absolutely one. So this is called achintya bheda bheda, a simultaneous oneness but distinction. That's the most synthetic understanding of Vedanta. Hope that helps. Anything else? Because it's late now, we should probably stop. We don't want to go over time. Thank you all very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.